Let's start with everyone's favorite argument for God. And if this isn't your favorite argument for God, then you're wrong. It's the argument that asserts that if you can think of it, it's real. I call it the imagination game, but you may know it as the ontological argument. Allow me to demonstrate. I have produced here for you the greatest possible presentation. If this, the greatest possible presentation, did not exist, then you could produce a greater possible presentation. But you cannot produce a greater possible presentation than this, the greatest possible presentation. Hence, this is the greatest possible presentation. Checkmate, you neckbeard atheists. You see, the ontological argument treats existence as if it's an attribute, and then reasons that God must have this attribute, since he is, by definition, the greatest possible being. Yes, I know this is philosophical masturbation at its finest. Objections. So there was this guy called Guanilo, and Guanilo existed at the same time as Anselm. He was a contemporary of Anselm. And what he did is he went, look, bro, we can just replace the word the greatest possible being, the term the greatest possible being, with the greatest possible island, and then we're going to have the greatest possible island. If you now think of an island and it's perfect for you, you're thinking it's got cookies, it's got Seth Andrews narrating your life, whatever it might be, but you don't have existence as part of the island's definition, then, well, I can think of a greater island, namely the one that you've just described, but with the addition of existence. It's better to exist than not exist. That's the general thrust, of course, and it works just as much for island. It also works for an evil being. The greatest possible evil being would be one that necessarily exists. And if you read the Bible, I actually think that evil being is a better description of God than a good being. Or this is my favorite one. We can say that we can conceive of the worst possible argument, and quite frankly, the ontological argument competes for that, may even be it. We can, if we like, instead take a page out of Kant's book and point out that existence is not a predicate. Existence is not an attribute, but rather that which attributes apply to. And in doing so, we can reject premise 2. Given the time, I've only got 14 minutes, as I said. We need to get through this quickly, so let's move on.
Okay, so there's a lot thrown out there, Jono. So where do you want to take this?
Yeah, well, the ontological argument, it's one where, especially if you're not used to philosophy, you feel like a trick's being played on you, especially other versions where they're talking about possible worlds and S5 and all this stuff. But maybe I'll get your opinion. So when you defend theism, this isn't really an argument that you go for. So I'm wondering, is that because some of the reasons I just said, or do you just not think it's a good argument?
Yeah, I'm honestly, my mind's not really made up on the ontological argument. I do think that like Steve's objections that he gives in this video, I think they can be defeated, but then I'm still kind of hung up on like actually if the argument works or not. So that's why I've never like actually defended it. But yeah.
Yeah. Can I make an honest but truthful, a little bit mean comment? So he said the worst possible argument, and I had wrote here that he hasn't read any Tim Zhao, but that's it. Anyway, so the island objection, I think I would agree with you. That's not the best objection to the ontological argument, because you can talk about reasons why, in principle, you couldn't have a greatest possible island, because you could always have one extra cocktail on the beach, or one extra palm tree to keep the sun off you, those kinds of things. So I don't think the island objection is the best way to go. I did like what he had to say about how it treats existence as a predicate. Mm-hmm. So maybe I'll just explain that. So when we're doing logic, a predicate is like a property that we say some object has. So we say the sheep is green. So we might write capital G and then a little s next to it, which means this sheep has this property green. And then also uncontroversial in logic is that you can't treat existence like you would greenness, but the ontological argument does that, which is one objection, which Kant like famously developed. So I think he did a good job bringing that one up. Did you have more you wanted to say there?
Sure. I mean, so I think you covered the greatest conceivable island thing. The evil being thing was interesting because, like, if we think of God as like a purely positive being, then it would be weird for God to have everything greater to have than not, but then also just be like maximally evil. Like that just seems to go against some conceptions of like what it would mean for God to be like perfect or maximally great. The worst possible argument thing didn't make a lot of sense to me. And then there was this interesting quote from the Blackwell where, I mean, I haven't made my mind up on existence as a predicate. Like for me, it's like the idea of like brought up in the chat, like the reverse ontological argument. Like that's my go-to objection would be like just denying that it's possible that God exists, especially when you get into like Plantinga's argument and stuff like that. That's probably where the best is. But I do think like you can maybe defend it because like there's this great quote in the Blackwell where it talks about on page 570 where it says real money because it exists adds financial values to things that exist. merely possible money, because it does not exist, does not add a financial value to things that exist, it would seem then that Kant would consistently hold that existence is not only a property, but that it is also perfection, so long as it's not included in the thing's concept. And to me, like, I don't think it's like some sort of like Kant debunked thing, but it's like, I do think there's some weight to saying existence isn't. Yeah.
So my thoughts on the reverse ontological argument, I think it's a good one, but it's more of an objection to kind of the modal versions that, like you said, Plantinga. I'm not sure how relevant that is to Anselm's version, which is what Steve is talking about. There's no real like possibility premise in this. Because if it was the modal argument, you'd talk about like Felipe Leon and modal skepticism, that kind of thing. But I'm not sure that's as relevant to this version of the argument.
Yeah, I think that's right. Do you have any guys you want to add here with regards to the ontological argument?
Not really. I'm interested in your thoughts, which you already laid out. Yeah. Like I would stress before, it is a strange one to the atheists. It's just like, it just feels like someone's pulling your leg. But
Yeah. No, I get how it can like seem strange. Like the first time I was ever exposed to the ontological argument, I was like, what is this? And it took me a while to actually like make sense of what it's actually trying to get at. And it's interesting, and I'm not really sure. Like obviously, I think it's possible God exists because like God exists in my by my life. But you know, defending it as like a rigorous argument to show the existence of God, like I don't know if you can do that. So
yeah.
Just think that Steve's rejections don't work. You good to go?
Well, I think his objections do work. They'd probably just need to be fleshed out more about the predicate. But yeah, I agree.
Yeah, that's helpful.
But not that I'm holding him to a super high standard in a short video, obviously.
Yeah, and he did this as like fun and whatnot, so he's not trying to like act like I don't think he actually thought he debunked God's existence. He's just trying to throw a bunch of objections at common arguments. So yeah.